Rome's story begins on the Palatine Hill, where Romulus supposedly founded the city after a bitter rivalry with his twin brother, Remus. This hill isn't just a backdrop to a myth, it's where history and legend intertwine. Today, visitors can explore the Palatine Hill, one of the most iconic archaeological sites in the world, and walk in the footsteps of Rome's earliest days. The story of Romulus and Remus is one of the most famous legends in ancient history. These twin brothers, raised by a she-wolf, are said to have founded the city of Rome. But is this tale a myth, a fragment of history, or a blend of both? In this video, we will explore the legendary founding of Rome, the archaeological evidence that reveals the city's early history, and the historical context behind this enduring myth. We'll also consider why the Romans created this story in the first place, and how the year 753 BCE became etched in history as Rome's founding date. Finally, we'll uncover what we know about the true origins of Rome. This is the story of Romulus and Remus and the foundation of Rome. The myth of Romulus and Remus is the beating heart of Rome's origin story, a tale of divine intervention, survival against the odds, and ultimately, betrayal. According to tradition, the twin brothers were the sons of Mars, the formidable Roman god of war, and Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin. Their birth alone was remarkable. Vestal virgins were sworn to celibacy under threat of death, but Mars supposedly descended from the heavens and fathered the twins, cementing their destiny as heroes with divine blood in their veins. But greatness always seems to come with hardship, and their story begins in tragedy. Rhea Silvia's uncle, the power-hungry King Amulius, had usurped the throne of Alba Longa from her father, Numita. To ensure no rival heirs would challenge his rule, Amulius killed all of Numita's male descendants and forced Rhea Silvia into the Vestal Order to prevent her from bearing children. When news of her pregnancy surfaced, Amulius was furious. After the twins were born, he ordered them to be cast into the Tiber River to drown. Yet fate, and perhaps the gods, intervened. The river was unusually high that day, causing the twins' reed basket to become caught on the roots of a fig tree at the base of the Palatine Hill. The tree itself, the Ficus ruminalis, became a sacred symbol in Roman culture, standing as a monument to the twins' miraculous survival. Enter the lupa, the she-wolf. In a twist of mythological wonder, a wolf discovered the crying infants and carried them to her den in a cave known as the Lupercal. Instead of devouring them, as one might expect, she nursed the twins with her milk, a divine act that would later be immortalized in countless works of Roman art and sculpture. Some versions of the legend add another curious detail: a woodpecker, sacred to Mars, helped feed the boys, bringing them morsels of food as they grew stronger. Both animals symbolized Mars's protection over his sons, a sign that the god of war was watching over them. Eventually, the twins were discovered by Faustulus, a humble shepherd who lived nearby. According to legend, Faustulus found them near a fig tree as the wolf stood protectively nearby. Recognizing something extraordinary about the children, he and his wife, Acca Laurentia, raised them as their own. Here, a fascinating twist adds depth to the myth. In some traditions, lupa was a colloquial term for a woman of questionable repute, leading to speculation that Acca Laurentia, not an actual wolf, might have been the one to care for the boys. Whether this version holds any truth or not, it adds an intriguing human layer to the tale. As the twins grew, they became renowned for their strength, courage, and leadership. They were said to tower above their peers in stature, with a natural charisma that drew people to them. They were hunters by trade, but also protectors of the downtrodden, often ambushing robbers and redistributing their spoils among the local shepherds. These exploits earned them the admiration of the surrounding tribes, who began to follow them. But the peace of their youth was soon shattered when Remus was captured during a raid and brought before King Amulius. It was during this crisis that Faustulus finally revealed the truth of their origins to Romulus. Enraged by the injustice inflicted upon their family, the brothers united to overthrow Amulius. With the support of their grandfather Numita, they stormed Alba Longa, killed the usurper, and restored Numita to his rightful throne. Although they had reclaimed their family's legacy, Romulus and Remus were not content to remain in Alba Longa. They longed to establish a city of their own, a place that would bear the mark of their unique destiny. Together, they returned to the site where the she-wolf had nursed them, the Palatine Hill, believing it to be a place blessed by the gods. But as fate would have it, the bond between the brothers began to unravel. They disagreed on the location of their new city. Romulus wanted to build on the Palatine Hill, while Remus favored the Aventine Hill, which he believed was easier to defend and develop. The two brothers, unwilling to compromise, decided to let the gods settle the matter through augury, the ancient Roman practice of divination by observing the behavior of birds. Remus was the first to spot a sign, 6 vultures circling above the Aventine Hill. Confident in his victory, he claimed divine approval. But then Romulus reported seeing 12 vultures flying over the Palatine Hill. The dispute escalated because they had failed to agree beforehand on whether priority or quantity would decide the outcome. Did the gods favor Remus for seeing the birds first? Or Romulus for seeing more of them? Their rivalry boiled over into violence. While the details vary between versions of the story, the most common account tells us that Remus mockingly jumped over the sacred boundary, Pomerium. Romulus had begun to plow around his city. This act, whether in jest or provocation, was seen as a grave insult to the sanctity of the city and to Romulus's authority. In a fit of rage, Romulus struck down his brother, killing him on the spot. Some versions of the tale suggest that one of Romulus's followers delivered the fatal blow, but all agree that Remus's death marked the decisive moment in Rome's founding. Heartbroken yet resolute, Romulus pressed forward with his vision. In 753 BCE, he officially founded the city, naming it Rome after himself. The Pomerium was marked with a sacred furrow, symbolizing the divine protection of the gods. The act of founding was more than physical construction, it was a religious ceremony. Every Roman city was considered a sacred space, and violating its boundaries was a sin punishable by death, as Remus tragically discovered. Romulus's reign as Rome's first king lasted 38 years. During this time, he established many of the city's earliest institutions, including the Senate, a council of elders who advised him. He also organized a rudimentary military force, setting the stage for Rome's eventual dominance as a martial power. According to legend, Romulus's story did not end with his death. One day, as he reviewed his army on the Campus Martius, a sudden storm swept through the sky. When it cleared, Romulus had vanished. His followers believed he had been taken up to the heavens by the gods and deified as Quirinus, a god of Rome. This transformation from mortal king to divine protector ensured that Romulus's legacy would endure for eternity. From divine parentage to the founding of one of the world's greatest cities, the story of Romulus and Remus captures the imagination not only as a myth, but as a lens through which we can glimpse the values, struggles, and ambitions of early Rome. The story of Romulus and Remus is captivating, but what can archaeology tell us about the early history of Rome? Can science uncover the truth behind the legend? Archaeological investigations on the Palatine Hill, long considered the mythological birthplace of Rome, have revealed tantalizing clues about the city's origins. Excavations here have uncovered evidence of settlements dating back to the 8th century BCE, the exact period associated with Rome's legendary founding in 753 BCE. While no archaeological evidence of Romulus and Remus or the she-wolf exists, the discoveries on the Palatine Hill help bridge the gap between myth and history. One of the most significant findings is the remains of primitive huts, constructed from wooden posts and covered with thatched roofs. These huts, simple by modern standards, represent the beginnings of urban settlement. Their locations align with the Palatine Hill's natural contours, suggesting that the earliest inhabitants were shepherds and farmers who chose this spot strategically. The huts were not randomly scattered. Archaeologists have discovered a pattern to their layout, indicating a sense of community and organization. The post holes that supported these huts, essentially indentations left in the ground, are some of the most evocative remnants of ancient Rome's earliest days. Imagine a time when Rome wasn't marble temples and grand monuments, but a collection of modest wooden dwellings, nestled among the hills and surrounded by dense woods and wild animals. Another remarkable discovery is a stone wall from the same period, possibly an early attempt at fortification or a boundary marker. Some scholars speculate that this wall could be linked to the mythological Pomerium, the sacred boundary Romulus is said to have plowed to define his new city. While we can't know for certain, the wall's presence points to an evolving settlement, one that was gradually shifting from a loose tribal community to a more structured society. The Palatine Hills location offered clear advantages that made it an ideal spot for early settlers. Its elevation provided natural defenses against invaders, while its proximity to the Tiber River was critical for survival. The river served as a source of fresh water and as a transportation route, connecting the settlement to other communities in the region. Trade would have been facilitated by this location, with goods like salt, pottery, and foodstuffs moving up and down the river. In fact, the ancient Via Salaria, or Salt Road, ran nearby, highlighting the importance of salt trade in the area's early economy. But perhaps the most fascinating detail is the evidence of ritual activity on the Palatine Hill. Archaeologists have uncovered fragments of pottery and other artifacts that suggest early religious practices. This is significant because the Lupercal Cave, the legendary den of the she-wolf, was said to be located on this hill. While the exact location of the Lupercal remains uncertain, the discovery of ritual items reinforces the idea that this area was imbued with spiritual importance even before Rome's rise as a city. Beyond the Palatine Hill, other nearby sites provide additional context for Rome's early days. The Capitoline and Aventine Hills also show signs of early human habitation, indicating that the broader region was dotted with settlements long before Rome became a city. These neighboring communities may have been independent at first, but over time, they likely merged to form the nucleus of what would become Rome. This gradual unification of tribal groups helps explain why the Romulus and Remus story resonates as a tale of consolidation and city building. Another critical archaeological site is the Forum Boarium, an ancient cattle market near the Tiber River. This area provides evidence of early trade and economic activity. The Forum Boarium's location at a fordable point of the river suggests that it was a natural meeting place for people, long before the grandeur of the Roman Forum emerged. The bustling activity here would have been crucial in transforming Rome from a mere village into a thriving settlement. While archaeological findings cannot definitively confirm the legend of Romulus and Remus, they offer a compelling backdrop for the myth. The transition from scattered huts to a permanent settlement coincides with the timeline of the legend, and the strategic location of the Palatine Hill aligns with the practical needs of early settlers. This fusion of myth and archaeology paints a picture of Rome's humble beginnings, a place where history and legend intertwine. Perhaps the most striking realization is how small and modest Rome's origins truly were. Long before the grandeur of the Colosseum or the Forum, Rome was just a cluster of huts on a hill, its inhabitants eking out a living through farming, herding, and trade. And yet, even in these early days, there were signs of ambition, the desire to mark boundaries, build walls, and organize a community. These archaeological findings remind us that every great city has a beginning, often rooted in simplicity and struggle. The evidence from the Palatine Hill gives us a glimpse into a world where myth and reality overlap, a world where a fledgling community laid the groundwork for what would one day become the heart of an empire. Rome's story did not begin in isolation. It was shaped by the interplay of cultures, tribes, and geographic factors that made the Italian peninsula a dynamic crossroads of civilizations. Long before Rome became a global superpower, it existed as part of a larger mosaic of tribal communities, deeply influenced by its neighbors, particularly the Latins and the Etruscans. Understanding these cultural interactions is key to uncovering the historical roots of early Rome. The Latins, the original inhabitants of the region, were a network of loosely connected tribes who spoke a common language, Latin. Their villages dotted the fertile hills and valleys surrounding the Tiber River, a landscape well-suited to farming, herding, and small-scale trade. These early Latin communities were not centralized, but they shared customs, religious beliefs, and a communal way of life. Among them was Alba Longa, the ancestral home of Romulus and Remus, according to the myth. Alba Longa was likely one of the dominant Latin settlements, serving as a center of power in the region before Rome rose to prominence. Interestingly, Latin culture was deeply rooted in practical, agrarian values. Their early religious practices revolved around agricultural cycles, with gods and rituals tied to planting, harvests, and fertility. Some of these deities, like Janus, god of doorways and transitions. And Saturn, a god of sowing and seeds, would later become central to Roman religion. The Latins also developed early forms of governance based on tribal assemblies, which may have influenced the later Roman Republic's emphasis on collective decision-making. To the north of the Latins lay the Etruscans, a sophisticated and powerful civilization that profoundly influenced Rome's early development. The Etruscans were master engineers, builders, and traders, with a thriving culture that dominated much of central Italy from around the 8th century BCE. Their city-states, such as Veii, Tarquinii, and Clusium, were wealthy and well-organized, connected by advanced road networks that facilitated trade and communication. The Etruscans brought monumental architecture and urban planning to early Rome. They introduced the concept of building temples on elevated platforms, a design that would later define Roman religious structures. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's ancient sewer system, is often attributed to Etruscan engineers, as are many of the techniques used in constructing the city's early fortifications and roads. Religiously, the Etruscans contributed significantly to Rome's spiritual framework. The practice of augury, divination through observing birds, and haruspicy, interpreting omens from animal entrails, originated with the Etruscans. These rituals became cornerstones of Roman religious and political life, providing a means to legitimize decisions and connect governance to the will of the gods. Politically, the Etruscans left an indelible mark on early Rome. The institution of kingship in Rome's early history reflects Etruscan influence. In fact, 3 of Rome's 7 legendary kings, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus, were Etruscans. These kings introduced elements of Etruscan political systems, symbolizing authority, which would later become an enduring symbol of Roman power. Rome's geography was another critical factor in its early development. Situated along the banks of the Tiber River, Rome occupied a natural crossroads that linked central Italy to the Mediterranean world. The Tiber was more than just a water source, it was a lifeline that connected the early Latin villages to vital trade routes. The river provided access to the sea while remaining far enough inland to protect Rome from frequent raids by pirates, a common threat to coastal settlements. It also served as a fording point, where travelers and traders crossing central Italy could gather. This strategic location allowed Rome to develop as a hub for trade and communication. Over time, the Tiber facilitated the exchange of goods like salt, grain, and livestock, as well as cultural ideas and innovations from neighboring tribes and civilizations. Rome's location on the Italian peninsula positioned it at the intersection of diverse cultures. To the south, the Greeks established colonies in Magna Graecia, bringing their advanced knowledge of art, philosophy, and governance. The Etruscans to the north contributed engineering, religion, and political traditions, while the Latins provided the cultural and linguistic foundation. Rome did not merely adopt these influences, it synthesized them, creating a unique identity that combined elements of all its neighbors. For example, Roman urbanization can be traced to Etruscan planning, but its legal and military systems were deeply rooted in Latin traditions. Similarly, Roman religion absorbed Etruscan rituals and Greek deities, adapting them to fit the city's needs. This ability to assimilate and adapt ideas was a hallmark of early Rome and would become one of its greatest strengths in the centuries to come. The formation of early Rome was not a single, dramatic event but a gradual process of tribal unification. Archaeological evidence suggests that the hills around the Tiber were initially home to independent communities that eventually merged, driven by shared interests in trade, defense, and survival. The Romulus and Remus myth, with its themes of conflict and eventual unity, reflects this historical reality. The idea of a single founder uniting disparate groups under one city may have been a symbolic way to explain Rome's early alliances. As these tribes came together, they laid the groundwork for the Roman Republic, whose emphasis on collaboration and shared governance echoed the cooperative spirit of its earliest inhabitants. Rome's rise was no accident. Its early development was the result of a perfect storm of geography, trade, and cultural interaction. The Latins provided the foundation. The Etruscans contributed sophistication. And the Tiber River ensured connectivity and economic growth. Rome's ability to absorb and adapt these influences was key to its transformation from a modest settlement on the Palatine Hill into a powerful city-state poised to dominate the ancient world. The historical context behind Rome's founding reminds us that even the greatest empires start from humble beginnings. In the case of Rome, its strength came not only from its natural advantages, but also from its ability to learn from and collaborate with its neighbors, a theme that would resonate throughout its history. The story of Romulus and Remus is not just a legend, it's a foundational myth that served a deeper purpose in Roman culture. Myths like this weren't simply stories told to entertain, they were powerful tools for creating identity, legitimizing power, and fostering unity. So why did the Romans tell this particular story, and what made it so central to their understanding of themselves? One of the primary purposes of the Romulus and Remus myth was to connect Rome directly to the gods, legitimizing its rise to power and reinforcing its special status among the cities of the ancient world. By claiming Mars, the god of war, as the father of Romulus and Remus, the myth tied Rome's founding to divine will. Mars's role was no accident. As the god of war, Mars symbolized the militaristic nature of Roman society, emphasizing Rome's destiny as a conquering power. Unlike other cities, which often traced their origins to gods of agriculture or craftsmanship, Rome rooted its identity in war and dominance. This divine connection not only justified Rome's ambitions, but also provided a sense of inevitability about its greatness. Even the setting of the myth reflects divine intervention. The Tiber River, which carried the twins to safety, became a symbol of Rome's resilience and adaptability, as well as its vital role in trade and expansion. The she-wolf, Lupa, who nursed the infants, was interpreted as a sign of Rome's protection by wild, primal forces, further enhancing the city's connection to the divine and the extraordinary. The myth also served as a metaphor for the unification of Rome's early tribes. Historically, Rome didn't emerge as a unified city overnight. It began as a collection of tribal communities, including Latins, Sabines, and Etruscans. The story of Romulus and Remus, two brothers who came together to overthrow a tyrant and establish a new city, provided a narrative framework for understanding this unification. Romulus, as the sole founder after the death of Remus, represents the consolidation of power and the emergence of a single authority. His decision to found the city on the Palatine Hill and mark its sacred boundary, Pomerium, symbolized the establishment of order, law, and shared purpose among the early tribes. In essence, the myth of Romulus and Remus wasn't just about where Rome came from, it was about how Rome overcame division and created unity. The myth of Romulus and Remus is also a vehicle for teaching and celebrating core Roman values, such as courage, perseverance, and the primacy of duty. From their miraculous survival as infants to their overthrow of King Amulius and their founding of Rome, the twins represent resilience in the face of hardship and an unyielding drive for greatness. Courage and strength, the twins' journey, from their abandonment to their rise as leaders, exemplifies the bravery and strength Romans prized. Romulus, in particular, is portrayed as a figure of determination, willing to make difficult decisions, including the killing of his brother, to protect the city and its sacred boundaries. Duty over personal ties, Romulus's decision to kill Remus, while tragic, underscores the Roman belief that loyalty to the state and its laws must come before personal relationships. This idea became a cornerstone of Roman society, as citizens were expected to prioritize the welfare of the Republic above all else. Perseverance and destiny, the survival of Romulus and Remus despite overwhelming odds, abandonment as infants, exile, and family betrayal, parallels Rome's own story of rising from humble beginnings to dominance. The myth reminded Romans that their city's greatness was hard-won and preordained by the gods. The elements of the Romulus and Remus story are rich with symbolism, reflecting themes central to Roman culture and identity. The she-wolf, Lupa the Lupa, is one of the most iconic symbols of Rome. Her nurturing of the twins represented Rome as both a protector and a fierce, untamed force. In some interpretations, Lupa may refer to a human wet nurse or even a woman of ill repute, adding a layer of human complexity to the myth. The augury contest, the contest of augury, where the brothers looked for divine signs to decide the location of their city, reflects the Roman practice of seeking the gods' approval for major decisions. This act tied the founding of Rome to divine will, while also highlighting the importance of religious rituals in Roman governance. The Tiber River, the river that carried the twins to safety, symbolized not only divine intervention, but also the practical importance of the Tiber in Rome's early growth. It served as a trade route, a source of fresh water, and a lifeline for the fledgling city. Mars, god of war, as their father, Mars represented not only Rome's militaristic ethos but also its divine right to expand and dominate. The myth framed Rome's conquests as part of a sacred mission rather than mere territorial ambition. Roman historians like Livy, writing centuries after Rome's founding, played a key role in shaping the Romulus and Remus myth. Livy, in particular, used the story to reinforce values central to Rome's identity and to draw connections between the city's mythological past and its imperial present. Livy wrote during the reign of Augustus, Rome's first emperor, who sought to restore Rome's traditional values after years of civil war. The myth of Romulus and Remus was perfect for this purpose. It celebrated courage, discipline, and unity, values that Augustus wanted to associate with his own rule. Augustus even styled himself as a new Romulus, presenting himself as the unifier of Rome and the restorer of its greatness. As Rome grew from a city-state to a sprawling empire, the myth of Romulus and Remus became a unifying narrative for an increasingly diverse population. Romans, Etruscans, Greeks, and others could all identify with the story, which presented Rome as a city built on shared struggles and divine favor. The myth transcended cultural and ethnic differences, providing a single origin story that united the empire under the banner of Roman identity. Above all, the story of Romulus and Remus inspired pride and ambition. It told Romans that their city wasn't born by accident, it was the product of destiny, divine intervention, and human perseverance. The myth gave Rome a heroic narrative to look back on, even in times of struggle, and to project forward as it expanded its influence across the Mediterranean. The story of Romulus and Remus isn't just a tale of two brothers, it's a story of what Rome believed about itself. It legitimized Rome's divine origins, celebrated its values, and created a shared identity for its people. Whether or not the story is historically true, its purpose was clear: to remind Romans of their greatness and to inspire them to build a city and an empire worthy of the gods. The year 753 BCE has been celebrated for centuries as the official founding date of Rome. But why this specific year? And how was it calculated? The answer lies in a combination of mythology, historical approximation, and later Roman efforts to construct a timeline for their city's origins. The date of 753 BCE comes from the work of the Roman scholar Marcus Terentius Varro, a polymath who lived in the 1st century BCE during the late Roman Republic. Varro, often called the most learned of the Romans, sought to construct a chronological framework for Roman history by carefully analyzing earlier sources, oral traditions, and mythological accounts. His calculations synchronized the timeline of the Roman kings, starting with Romulus, with broader historical events in the Mediterranean world. To establish the founding date, Varro worked backward. He used a combination of genealogies, myths, and accounts of historical events, comparing them to known dates from Greek and Etruscan history. Varro placed the start of the Roman Republic in 509 BCE, when the last Roman king, Tarquinius Superbus, was overthrown. By counting the reigns of the 7 legendary kings of Rome, beginning with Romulus, he arrived at the mid-8th century BCE, 753 BCE, as the date of Rome's foundation. Varro's date was later embraced by Roman historians and became official during the reign of Augustus. It was a convenient and symbolic way to tie Rome's origins to a specific moment in time, giving the city a sense of destiny and continuity. The year 753 BCE was chosen, in part, for its symbolic significance. By placing Rome's founding in the mid-8th century BCE, Varro aligned the city's origins with other key events in Mediterranean history. For example, the founding of the Greek city of Syracuse occurred around the same time. And Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were thought to have been composed in this era. This connection helped reinforce the idea that Rome was destined to be part of the great cultural and political tapestry of the ancient world. Moreover, Varro's date conveniently framed Rome as an ancient city even by the standards of the late Republic and early Empire. By situating its founding centuries earlier than most of its contemporaries, the Romans could claim an illustrious and almost timeless heritage, placing themselves among the most ancient civilizations of the Mediterranean. While 753 BCE is rooted in myth and scholarly reconstruction, archaeological evidence from the Palatine Hill lends credibility to this time frame. Excavations have uncovered traces of settlements dating to the 8th century BCE, including the remains of wooden huts, post holes, and rudimentary stone walls. These findings suggest that the mid-8th century BCE was indeed a turning point when scattered tribal communities in the region began to consolidate into a more organized and permanent settlement. This period also coincides with broader patterns of urbanization in central Italy. Other Latin cities, such as Alba Longa and Lavinium, were undergoing similar transitions during this time. The rise of trade networks, the establishment of agricultural surpluses, and increased contact with the Etruscans and Greek colonies likely spurred these changes, creating the conditions for Rome's emergence. While we may never pinpoint the exact moment when Rome transitioned from a cluster of villages into a unified city, the archaeological evidence from the Palatine Hill provides a tangible connection to the traditional date of 753 BCE. Whether or not the founding of Rome occurred precisely in 753 BCE, the date became a cornerstone of Roman identity. It provided a clear marker for the city's age, allowing Romans to measure their history in terms of ab urbi condita, AUC, or from the founding of the city. This system of dating became central to Roman historical writing and remained in use for centuries. The date also served as a reminder of Rome's exceptionalism. Unlike other cities that emerged organically without a clear origin story, Rome had a founding myth tied to a specific year, place, and figure, Romulus. By celebrating 753 BCE, the Romans reinforced the idea that their city was destined for greatness from the very beginning. Modern historians and archaeologists are cautious about taking 753 BCE as a literal date. While the evidence suggests that Rome's early settlement on the Palatine Hill dates to roughly the 8th century BCE, the process of urbanization likely took decades, if not centuries. The founding of Rome, therefore, cannot be pinned to a single event or individual. Instead, the date 753 BCE serves as a symbolic anchor, a midpoint between myth and history that reflects Rome's early development while honoring its legendary beginnings. It represents the moment when the Romans, through scholars like Varro, sought to weave their history into a coherent narrative that connected their humble origins to their imperial grandeur. The year 753 BCE may not be an exact historical fact, but it has become an indelible part of Rome's identity. Calculated by Varro and embraced by later generations, it marks the bridge between myth and history, linking the story of Romulus and Remus to the archaeological evidence of early settlements. Whether celebrated as the literal founding date or a symbolic milestone, 753 BCE reminds us of Rome's enduring legacy, a city whose story continues to captivate and inspire. The story of Romulus and Remus is more than a legend, it's a reflection of Rome's values, struggles, and ambitions. From humble beginnings on the Palatine Hill to the center of a vast empire, Rome's journey is one of resilience and transformation. Even today, the legacy of Rome's founding is deeply ingrained in the city. Visitors to modern Rome can see the famous Lupa Capitolina statue, which depicts the she-wolf suckling the twin brothers, proudly displayed in the Capitoline museums. The Palatine Hill, where Romulus supposedly founded the city, remains one of the most iconic archaeological sites in the world, offering a glimpse into the very origins of Roman civilization. Elsewhere in the city, traces of Rome's mythical and historical past can be found in its architecture, landmarks, and even its traditions. The Ficus Ruminalis, the sacred fig tree tied to the twins' survival, is honored symbolically near the Forum. While the Lupercalia festival, a celebration of fertility and purification rooted in the Romulus and Remus myth, continues to influence cultural festivities and ceremonies in Rome and beyond. The real story of Rome's founding is one of cooperation, competition, and ingenuity. From its humble beginnings as a cluster of tribal villages to its transformation into a thriving city-state, Rome's rise was a testament to its people's resourcefulness and determination. The myth of Romulus and Remus gave this gradual process a heroic narrative, connecting the city's origins to the gods and inspiring generations of Romans to believe in their city's destined greatness. Whether in its art, its monuments, or its enduring reputation as the eternal city, Rome carries forward the spirit of its legendary origins, inspiring all who walk its ancient streets. If you enjoyed this exploration of Rome's founding, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in our next journey through history.